A folded piece of paper. No envelope, no name written on the outside. Just a single sheet of white paper, folded twice, sitting on top of a stack of financial documents on the desk of a woman who hadn't slept in 3 days. Sarah Boateng almost swept it onto the floor with the empty coffee cups. She almost didn't open it. But something about the handwriting on the inside, when she finally unfolded it, made her sit back down. 7 words, written in blue ink, in the careful, even hand of someone who measured every letter before committing it to the page. 7 words that changed everything. Not because they told her something new, because they told her where to look for something she already had. Something that had been sitting in her own files for 4 months. Something that the 8 senior analysts at Merit Capital Management had looked at again and again and never once seen. The woman who left that note on her desk was not an analyst. She was not a consultant. She was not a partner. She was the woman who refilled the coffee station every morning at 6:45. The woman who restocked the supply closet on Tuesdays. The woman who moved through the offices of one of the most powerful investment firms in Charlotte, North Carolina, like a shadow, present, essential, invisible. Her name was Abena Kaye. She was 47 years old. She had been cleaning those offices for 9 years. And she had just saved a $340 million fund from collapse. If you've ever been the smartest person in the room that nobody looked at, stay with me. Because what they found when they finally looked at Abena, it will change the way you see every person who has ever refilled your coffee without you saying thank you. Sarah had arrived at Merit Capital 11 months ago. 29 years old, second-generation Ghanaian American. She had grown up watching her mother press uniforms at 4 in the morning, and her father study for his pharmacy licensing exam at the kitchen table after 12-hour shifts. She had gone to Duke on a full scholarship. She had turned down 2 other offers to come to Merit because James Merit himself had called her and said the words that no one had ever said to her in a professional context. "I want someone who sees what other people miss." She had believed him. For about 3 months. Then the Caldwell Fund case landed on her desk. The Caldwell Emerging Markets Fund was a $340 million investment vehicle that Merit Capital had been managing for 6 years, their biggest institutional client. The kind of account that paid for the Italian marble in the lobby and the bonuses that made the senior partners smile through February. The fund's primary holdings were concentrated across 4 West African markets, and for 6 years it had performed solidly. Predictably, the kind of boring, reassuring performance that institutional investors loved. Then it started bleeding, quietly at first. A dip in one sector, a correction in another, the kind of movement that could be explained away in a quarterly report. But by the time Sarah inherited the file, the fund was down 19% in 7 months, and James Merit had stopped smiling. The problem, according to every senior analyst at the firm, was market volatility, external factors, geopolitical instability in the region. The kind of explanation that sounded reasonable and meant nothing, and most importantly pointed the finger at forces beyond anyone's control. Sarah didn't believe it. She had read the prospectus. She had read the original due diligence reports. She had read the quarterly statements going back 6 years. And there was something wrong. Not with the markets, with the documents. A number that didn't reconcile. A line item that appeared in one report and vanished from the next. A currency conversion rate that was applied inconsistently across fiscal years in a way that was either a very serious accounting error or something much worse. She brought it to her supervisor, Paul Whitfield. He had been at Merit for 14 years. He wore the same brand of watch as James Merit and laughed at all the same things. Sarah. He said her name the way people say a word they're tired of hearing. The fund is underperforming because the markets are volatile. This isn't a conspiracy. I'm not saying conspiracy. I'm saying this depreciation schedule doesn't match the... Are you telling me that 6 senior analysts reviewed this fund and all 6 of them missed something that you found in what, 3 weeks? I'm saying it's worth looking at again. Run the volatility analysis. Write up the client memo. That's your job right now. She went back to her desk. She ran the volatility analysis. She wrote the client memo. And at 11 o'clock at night, after the office had emptied and the cleaning crew had come through, she pulled the Caldwell files back out and started again from the beginning. This is what nobody tells you about being the only person in a room who sees a problem. The loneliness of it is not the silence. The loneliness is doing the work twice. Once for them, and once for the truth. She was on her 4th consecutive late night when it happened. It was a Tuesday. She had a highlighter in one hand and a cold cup of tea in the other, and she was reading the same paragraph for the 8th time when the door opened. She didn't look up. She heard the familiar sound of a cart being wheeled in, the soft drag of it across the carpet. She heard the collection bag rustle as the trash was emptied beside the door. Then the subtle click of the light switch in the kitchenette being tested. Sarah had been working late for 3 months. The cleaning crew had been coming through the same way every night. She had learned the sound of each person. The one with the heavy footstep near the supply closet. The one who always hummed something low under his breath. And the one who moved quietly, deliberately. The one whose cart stopped for just a second longer than necessary near her desk before continuing on. She had never looked up, but tonight she felt it, that half-second pause beside her workstation, and she looked up. The woman was maybe 50, with the kind of posture that comes not from yoga or Pilates, but from decades of carrying things without complaining. She wore the green uniform of the cleaning service, Merit contracted. She had her cart, her supplies, her trash bag, and her eyes, before they moved away, were on the documents spread across Sarah's desk. Not glancing, reading, sorry to disturb. The woman's voice was soft, accented, the particular rhythm of someone who learned English as an adult and chose every word with care. You're not disturbing me. Sarah looked back down at her files. Then she looked back up. Do you need me to move anything? No, miss. The woman was already moving away, toward the next section of the office. Sarah watched her go. She had been coming through this office every night for months, and Sarah had never once asked her name. What's your name? She called. The woman paused, turned. Something careful crossed her face, like someone deciding whether a question was safe to answer. Abina, I'm Sarah. A small nod. And then Abina and her cart moved quietly out of the room. Sarah sat there for a moment. Then she looked back down at the Caldwell file. Then back at the door. She went back to work. The fund lost another 4% the following month. James Merritt called a crisis meeting. 9 people in the glass-walled conference room. Paul Whitfield presenting slides. The word volatility used 11 times. Sarah counted. Afterward, Merritt stopped her in the hallway. He was 62 years old, tall, silver at the temples, the kind of man who had spent 40 years being the most confident person in every room he entered. He looked at Sarah the way you look at a problem you haven't solved yet. You've been staying late, he said. I have some questions about the fund's accounting methodology. Paul told me you raised some concerns. I did. And? She chose her words carefully. I think the answer to what's happening with Caldwell isn't in the market data. I think it's in the documents. Merritt looked at her for a long moment. 8 people have looked at those documents, Sarah. I know. 8 very experienced people. I know, Mr. Merritt. He nodded once, the way people nod when they've decided something and are being polite about it. Write up your concerns. Send them to Paul. He walked away. She sent them to Paul. Paul replied with 3 sentences. I've reviewed your notes. The methodology is sound. Focus on the client memo. Sarah sat at her desk at 11:30 that night and did not cry. She did not cry because she had told herself she was not going to let this place do to her what it was trying to do, which was make her believe that the thing she could clearly see was not there. She put her head on her desk. She breathed, and she thought about her mother pressing uniforms at 4 in the morning, and her father studying at the kitchen table, and she thought about what they had worked for, and what she was working for, and whether any of it was going to mean anything, if she could not make one room of powerful people look at one number that did not reconcile. She did not hear the cart stop outside her office. She did not hear the door open. She did not hear the quiet, measured footsteps cross to her desk. She did not hear the soft tear of a page from a small notepad. She did not hear the pen move across the paper. She did not hear any of it, because she was too exhausted and too far inside her own despair to hear the world moving around her. But someone heard her. Abina Kaik stood in the doorway of that office for 6 seconds. She looked at the young woman with her head on the desk. She looked at the documents spread around her. She looked at the Caldwell Fund files, the same files she had looked at from the corner of her eye for 3 months, the same numbers she had run in her head during the hours when the building was dark and quiet, and the only people left were the ones the morning shift would never see. She set down her cart. She walked to the desk. She looked at the file open in front of Sarah. Page 34 of the original fund prospectus, the depreciation schedule that Sarah had circled in red, the line that didn't reconcile. Abina looked at it for a moment. She tilted her head slightly, the way a person does when they are confirming something they already know. Then she reached into the pocket of her uniform and found a pen. She tore a small page from the notepad she carried for her inventory checklists. She wrote 7 words. She placed the note on top of the page Sarah had circled, and she picked up her cart, and she left. 7 words, 42 seconds from the time she entered to the time she left. The hallway security camera would confirm it later, but that would come after. What came first was Sarah, lifting her head at 12:08 in the morning, reaching for her coffee cup, and knocking it against the corner of the note instead. She looked at it. She read it. Check the original 2019 fund amendment. 7 words. She sat very still. Then she opened her laptop. The 2019 amendment was not in the digital filing system. It had been referenced once in a footnote on page 78 of the 2020 annual report, and that footnote had a document number, and that document number corresponded to a physical file in the 4th floor archive room, and that archive room required a senior-level keycard to access, and Sarah did not have a senior-level keycard. She sat in her chair and thought about this for 4 minutes. Then she called the building's after-hours facilities line. The person who answered it was a man named George, who managed building access overnight. Sarah explained that she was an analyst at Merit Capital, working on an urgent client matter, and she needed access to the 4th floor archive room. George explained that after-hours archive access required a written request from a senior partner. Sarah said that she understood and asked if she could have George's supervisor's direct line. George gave her access. The archive room was cold and smelled like paper and the specific staleness of documents that no one had needed in years. Sarah found the cabinet. She found the folder. She found the 2019 Caldwell Fund Amendment. She read it standing up under the fluorescent lights in the cold room, still in her coat. The amendment had been executed in November 2019. It restructured the fund's currency hedging methodology. On the surface, standard practice. the kind of document that gets filed and forgotten. But embedded in Section 4, subsection C, in the particular language of someone who wanted to be able to point to a clause and say it was disclosed while also making sure no one ever actually found it, was a provision that changed how management fees were calculated during periods of elevated market adjustment. Elevated market adjustment. That was the phrase. 3 words, and they meant nothing on their own, and they meant everything in the context of the fund's performance data for the past 7 months. Because the fund had been classified internally as being in a period of elevated market adjustment for all 7 months it had been declining. And during those 7 months, the management fee structure had shifted in a way that was buried in a 2019 amendment that was not in the digital filing system, that was referenced only in a footnote, that directed money away from client returns and into a fee structure that benefited the firm. The fund wasn't declining because the markets were volatile. The fund was declining because it had been structured to decline in a way that was profitable for Merit Capital while the clients absorbed the loss. Sarah stood in that cold room for a long time. Then she took photographs of every page. She went back to her desk. She spent the next 4 hours building the documentation, the comparison, the calculation, the proof. At 4:47 in the morning, she sent one email. Not to Paul Whitfield, not to James Merritt, to the firm's independent legal compliance officer, copied to the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. Subject line, Caldwell Fund, possible undisclosed fee restructuring. Then she sat back, and for the first time in weeks, she breathed. The next 12 hours were the kind that people who have never reported something to a regulator cannot fully imagine, and people who cannot fully describe. There were phone calls. There were attorneys. There was a very quiet conversation with James Merritt in his office, a conversation in which he used the word misunderstanding 4 times. There was a conversation with Paul Whitfield that lasted less than 2 minutes and ended with Paul leaving the building. By noon, the firm's external compliance attorneys had confirmed what Sarah had found. The SC's preliminary response arrived by 2 p.m. By the end of the day, the Caldwell clients had been notified, and an independent audit had been ordered. James Merritt was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Sarah sat at her desk at 6 p.m., and the office around her was strange and quiet in the way that places go quiet after something large has moved through them. Some of her colleagues stopped by. Some didn't. She got a call from her mother, who had heard nothing but somehow knew to call. "You okay, baby?" "I think so, Mama." "You eat something today?" "Not really." "Then eat something." She was sitting there with a vending machine sandwich she couldn't make herself open when she heard the cart in the hallway. The cleaning crew. She got up. She went to the door. Abina was halfway down the corridor, moving with the same quiet, efficient steadiness she brought to every evening. She hadn't changed. She didn't know what the day had contained, what the note she'd left in the dark had set in motion. She was doing what she always did. Moving through the building, being the person the building needed her to be. Abena. The woman stopped, turned. Sarah didn't know what to say. She stood in the doorway of her office, in the wreckage and the aftermath of the most consequential day of her professional life, and she looked at this woman who had seen what 8 senior analysts had missed, who had read the documents that were spread across Sarah's desk every night for 3 months, who had written 7 words in blue ink and left them on a note and said nothing and gone back to her cart and trusted that someone would understand. "The note you left," Sarah said. "How did you know?" Abina looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something old. "You want to talk?" Sarah asked. "I have a terrible vending machine sandwich. I'm not eating it alone." A pause, long enough that Sarah thought she would say no. then the faintest shape of a smile. "Okay," Abena said. They sat in Sarah's office. Abena in the chair across from the desk, the same chair that Paul Whitfield had sat in 12 days ago, when he'd told Sarah her concerns weren't worth pursuing. She sat in it differently than he had. She sat in it like someone who had once sat in many chairs like this, in rooms like this, in a different life, in a different country, with a different name on the door. Abena Kaye had graduated at the top of her program from the University of Cape Coast in 1999. Economics and finance. She had gone to work for a regional development bank in Accra at 23. By 30, she was the youngest department head in the bank's history, overseeing investment analysis for a portfolio of West African infrastructure projects. She had a reputation for finding things, discrepancies, irregularities, the kinds of things that organizations prefer to stay hidden. In 2008, she found one too many. A senior official at the bank had been routing development funds through a series of shell vehicles. Small amounts, spread across years. The kind of fraud that requires patience and confidence, and the belief that no one beneath you is looking. Abena was looking. She documented everything. She brought it to the bank's board of directors. The board thanked her for her diligence. The investigation was conducted internally. The senior official was a friend of the chairman. The findings were inconclusive. Abena was offered a restructured role that would take her out of investment analysis entirely. She declined. 3 months later, her position was eliminated in a reorganization. Her professional references became unavailable. Her name appeared in no letters of recommendation. She was 34 years old, with 15 years of expertise and a career that had been quietly, efficiently erased. Her husband had family in Charlotte. She had 2 children. She made a decision the way you make a decision when you have no good options, only less bad ones. She came to America. Her credentials were not recognized. The recertification process was long and expensive and required time she didn't have. She found work that would fit around her children's school hours. She cleaned offices. She was precise. She was thorough. She was invisible. And every night, in the offices she cleaned, she read, not because she was looking for anything, not at first, but because the work that had defined her, that she had been built for, that had cost her everything the last time she tried to do it, it didn't leave her, just because someone had decided she was no longer allowed to do it. She had been reading the Caldwell files for 3 months before she understood what she was seeing. And when she understood it, she had stood in the archive hallway of that 4th floor on a Thursday night in November, holding a flashlight and a reference number that she had memorized from a footnote, and she had confirmed every calculation she had been running in her head. She had known for 3 months, and she had said nothing. Because the last time she said something in a different building, in a different country, they had taken everything from her. But then she watched Sarah Boateng work every night. She watched a young woman with her mother's determination and her father's discipline and the specific, exhausted grief of someone who could see the truth and could not get anyone to look at it. She watched that, and she thought about what it had cost her to stay silent and what it was costing this young woman to speak. And one night she set down her cart, and she picked up a pen, 7 words, because she had learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. Sarah listened. She didn't speak for a long time after Abena finished. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her mind since the moment she'd read the note. Have you ever thought about going back to it? Finance? Abena looked at the window, the Charlotte skyline outside, gray-blue in the evening. I am not a young woman anymore. You're 47. In this field, you saw what 8 people couldn't. In 3 months, from the corner of your eye. Abina was quiet. I'm not saying come work here. Sarah leaned forward. I don't know what this firm looks like in a month, but I know some people. I know a compliance consulting group that is desperately looking for someone who can find things in documents. She paused. Real things. Real money. I can make a call. Something shifted in Abina's face. Not hope exactly. More like the careful, guarded thing that sits just behind hope in a person who has been hurt by hoping before. I'm not looking for charity, Abina said. I know you're not. I'm looking for someone who knows what a 2019 fund amendment buried in a footnote looks like. And apparently that person cleans my office. The pause was long. Then Abina nodded. Once. Small. Like a door opening just a crack. It took 11 months. Not because Abina was not qualified. She was qualified in the way that people who have spent 15 years doing a thing and then 9 more years watching other people do it badly are qualified. She was profoundly, quietly, precisely qualified. It took 11 months because recertification is expensive and time-consuming and designed for people who have the luxury of not working while they study. Stera helped. She was not wealthy. She helped anyway. She called in favors. She made introductions. She spent 4 Sunday afternoons reviewing practice materials with Abina at the kitchen table of Abina's apartment, while Abina's teenage daughter brought them tea, and her younger son did homework on the couch. The compliance consulting firm offered Abina a contract position first. The contract became full-time. The full-time became, 14 months later, a formal offer with a title that matched what she had carried silently inside her for 9 years. Senior Investment Compliance Analyst. She called Sarah the morning she received the written offer. The phone rang twice before Sarah picked up. I got it, Abina said. Sarah laughed. The kind of laugh that lives right next to tears. I know, she said. They called me yesterday to ask about you. I told them the truth. What truth? That you're the kind of person who finds things other people miss. And that you did it from the corner of your eye, in a green uniform, while mopping someone's floor. Abina was quiet on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, careful, chosen, the way it always was. Thank you, Sarah, for looking up. Sarah sat in her own office, a different firm now, the afternoon light coming through the window. She thought about a folded piece of white paper. She thought about what it must have cost a woman who had already lost everything once to pick up a pen in the dark. She thought about all the people she had walked past in her life without seeing them. The security guards, the custodians, the women behind the coffee station. She thought about everything she might have missed. No, she said. Thank you for leaving the note. There are people in this world who have been made invisible. Not by nature, by circumstance, by systems that took what they built and gave them nothing in return, and then hired them to clean the building where someone else does the work they were born to do. Abina Kai mopped floors for 9 years. She filed supply orders. She restocked the coffee station. She moved through offices full of people who had never once asked her name, and every night she saw what they couldn't. She didn't leave that note because she wanted a job back. She didn't leave it for credit, or recognition, or any of the things we tell ourselves we'd want if we were her. She left it because a young woman was breaking under the weight of something she could almost see, and because Abina had spent 9 years learning that silence has its own cost, a cost she had already paid once. A cost she had decided, in 42 seconds in a quiet office at midnight, she was not willing to pay again. The next time you walk past someone carrying a cart, restocking the supply closet, wiping down the counter before the office opens, look at them. Not because they might save your fund, not because they might have a secret, but because they are a person, fully and completely, and some of them, more than you know, are carrying something extraordinary in the quiet. Subscribe and stay with us, because the next story we tell is about someone else the world counted out before counting was finished. And it might be the one that changes how you count.